welcome to our morning edition of Arirang News. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour, starting with the situation in the Middle East. Israel and Iran have agreed to a ceasefire, and the fragile deal appears to be holding, after U.S. President Donald Trump lashed out at the two countries, warning that they must not violate the agreement. President Trump is in the Netherlands for the NATO Summit, but he gave an ambiguous answer over whether the U.S. will abide by the military alliance mutual defense guarantee, saying it depends on definition. Today marks 75 years since the outbreak of the Korean War on June 25, 1950. We take a look at how those who fought in the war are remembered. U.S. President Donald Trump urged both Israel and Iran to stick to the ceasefire after tensions flared again shortly after it took effect. Both sides have claimed victory in the conflict, effectively accepting Trump's call for a truce. Our Shinayong starts us off.
U.S. President Donald Trump gave a strong warning to both Israel and Iran, accusing them of violating the ceasefire that he had announced earlier. According to the Associated Press, Trump on Tuesday expressed frustration with Israel for retaliating against Iran and called Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, urging him to stop the attacks.
Israel, as soon as we made the deal, they came out and they dropped a load of bombs, the likes of which I've never seen before. The biggest load that we've seen. I'm not happy with Israel.
Trump also emphasized that he does not want to see regime change in Iran, which he said would lead to chaos.
No, I don't want it. I'd like to see everything calm down as quickly as possible. Regime change takes chaos, and ideally we don't want to see so much chaos.
This comes as tensions flared again just hours after the ceasefire between Israel and Iran took effect on Tuesday. Israel accused Iran of violating the ceasefire with missile launches, while Iran denied the claims. The ceasefire appears to be holding for now, though, after Trump's outburst at both sides. Israel and Iran both claimed victory in their recent conflict. Israel said it had removed two major threats, Iran's nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles.
Dear citizens of Israel, during the 12 days of the Operation Rising Lion, we achieved a historic victory, and this victory will stand for generations.
Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz said on social media that Israel will respect the ceasefire as long as the other side does. The military chief of staff Eyal Zamir said that Israel's military is shifting its focus back to Gaza. Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian said Tehran would only hit Israel if it violates the ceasefire deal. He also expressed his country's readiness to resolve disputes with the U.S. within an international framework. All eyes are on the coming hours to see whether the ceasefire between Israel and Iran will hold. Shinayong, Arirang News.
So the ceasefire between Israel and Iran appears to be holding after U.S. President Donald Trump lashed out at both countries, insisting that the ceasefire was not being put into effect. For more, we're joined by Professor Hassan Khan, visiting professor at Hague University of Foreign Studies. Professor Khan, thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning. So Trump says the ceasefire between Israel and Iran continues to be in effect and that he expects this to last forever. Will the ceasefire hold?
This ceasefire between Israel and Iran remains technically in effect, but it's a kind of a precarious, and until now we cannot be sure that we can think that of it as a pause rather than a durable peace agreement. Trump's assertion that it will last forever reflects actually political optimism, not strategic reality. Historically, such truth in the Middle East, like in 2006 Israel-Hezbollah cessation or post-2019 Iran-backed militia truce in Iraq, have proven temporary rather than permanent when underlying issues remained unresolved. From a realist perspective, the absence of structural security guarantees and persistence of mutual threat perception, this ceasefire is vulnerable to to collapse at any provocations.
I see. So we'll have to see if the deal will be sustainable. So what did Israel and Iran gain from the war?
It's a very good question. Israel gained militarily, of course, and symbolically by damaging Iran's nuclear infrastructure, including centrifuge arrays in Natanz and Fordo. It delayed Iran's nuclear progress and reasserted deterrence. These actions reflect Israel's long-standing what we call Begin doctrine, a preventive strategy to eliminate a perceived existential threat, previously also seen in Iraq in 1981 and Syria in 2007. Iran, on the other hand, reinforced its strategic narrative of resistance. Despite heavy losses, Iran showcased its ability to retaliate directly and also via proxies. The alliance with Iran's strategic depth doctrine, which compensates for conventional inferiority by leveraging asymmetric tools to protect itself. Both states reinforced their identities, Israel as a regional enforcers of the red lines and Iran as a resilient revolutionary power.
I see. And will Iran never be able to rebuild a nuclear program, as Trump claims, now that the United States has bombed its nuclear facilities? And was the country actually very close to building a nuclear weapon, like Trump said?
Despite U.S. Airstrikes claims that Iran nuclear program has been eliminated, this is an overstatement. According to the U.S. military intelligence, that the report that the airstrikes on Iran's nuclear facilities set its program back only a few months. Also, historical precedents show us that external attacks tend to delay but not permanently dismantle nuclear ambitions, especially when political will remain. Iran reportedly several months away from nuclear breakout, not days, as Netanyahu said sometimes. The International Atomic Energy Agency confirmed Iran had enriched uranium at 60% purity. This is a short technical leap from weapons grade. However, nuclear latency does not equal weaponization. Also, I would argue that Iran pursued a hedging strategy, maintaining the option without actually crossing the threshold, both as leverage and deterrence. Trump's statement served as a political theater than grounded strategic assessment.
I see. And will Iran return to the negotiating table with the United States for nuclear talks? What cards do you think does Iran have left to play?
We are waiting for that to happen, but I think Iran is unlikely to return to direct talks with the U.S. in the near terms. But indirect diplomacy, especially via mediators, European mediators, is already underway. Iran's leverage lies in two domains, material and symbolic. Materially, it retains technical knowledge, centrifuge capacity, and enriched uranium stockpile they have. Symbolically, it maintains influence over key proxies like Hezbollah and Houthis, allowing it to shape regional dynamics. Iran, we have to know that the Iran domestic political structure also constrains its foreign policy. Negotiation is likely, but only on Tehran's terms, primarily lifting sanctions and regime security.
See, and before I let you go, how might the conflict between Israel and Iran affect the broader Middle East, including the ongoing war in Gaza?
Yeah, actually, this conflict is destabilizing variable in the already fragile regional equation. It diverts attention from Gaza crisis, complicates ceasefire efforts with Hamas, and may also embolden non-state actors in the area who interpret Iranian resilience as a green light. In the past, we saw similar dynamics during the 1982 Lebanon War and the 1991 Gulf War, when regional wars either empowered proxy actors or forced strategic recalibration of the actors involved. For the Iran-Israel conflict, it's not isolated from the rest of the region. It's interwoven with the strategic calculations of regional actors like Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Gulf states. Furthermore, control over maritime checkpoints like the Strait of Hormuz remains a very critical checkpoint, bargaining chip for Iran. This could have a global implication on the energy securities and echoing a past oil crisis. this geopolitical confrontation spills into global market. We hope that this doesn't happen.
Right, I guess we'll have to see how it goes. All right, Professor Khan, thank you so much for your insight today. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
And Washington on Tuesday reaffirmed the Trump administration's commitment to the complete denuclearization of North Korea after the United States launched strikes at key nuclear sites in Iran over the weekend. When asked whether there was a lesson for Pyongyang to learn from the U.S. strikes on the Iranian nuclear facilities, State Department spokesperson Tammy Bruce stressed that the administration remained committed to the complete denuclearization of North Korea. However, she added that if the North Korean nuclear issue can't be resolved through dialogue, the State Department was open to speculation on hypotheticals at this point. And U.S. President Trump has arrived at The Hague in the Netherlands to attend the NATO Summit. Now, this year's meeting is in the spotlight as the U.S. leader has repeatedly been critical of the alliance's lack of defense spending. Our Lee Seung-jae has more.
U.S. President Donald Trump arrived at The Hague on Tuesday and began his official activities for the North Atlantic Treaty Organization Summit. Leaders and officials from 32 countries, including President Trump, are scheduled to hold a plenary session of the North Atlantic Council on Wednesday local time, with a press conference scheduled for later that afternoon. The joint statement of this year's summit is expected to include an agreement that all member countries will eventually spend 5% of their GDP on defense, something the U.S. leader has been pushing for. Meanwhile, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte said on Tuesday that he has no doubt that the U.S. is committed to NATO's Article 5 Mutual Defense Clause. The comment came as Trump raised renewed doubts about his willingness to protect U.S. allies. When asked by a reporter on his way to The Hague whether he's still committed to Article 5, which states that an armed attack against one or more of its members would be considered an attack against all NATO member states, he gave a rather ambiguous answer.
It depends on your definition. There's numerous definitions of Article 5, you know that, right? But I'm committed to being their friends. You know, I've become friends with many of those leaders, and I'm committed to helping them.
Trump has, however, decided not to attend a special meeting with the Indo-Pacific 4 or IP4 countries, including South Korea. According to NATO officials, the U.S.-NATO IP4 meeting scheduled for Wednesday has been changed to a NATO IP4 format. One official said Trump's non-participation was due to scheduling issues. Meanwhile, with a major focus on NATO's defense spending this year, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer has pledged to meet the target of 5% of the UK's GDP by 2035. All NATO member countries are also expected to agree to spending 3.5% on core defense issues and the remaining 1.5% on other defense-related areas, such as resilience and security. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
South Korea has failed to advance toward developed market status under the MSCI's latest market classification review. The index provider on Wednesday kept the country in its emerging market category, citing limited reforms in the foreign exchange market and restricted access to investment instruments. The MSCI noted that despite some efforts to improve market accessibility, progress has been insufficient, and further talks on Korea's reclassification would require the full implementation of reforms and resolutions to all key issues. The announcement is a blow to Seoul's efforts to eliminate the so-called Korea discount, whereby Korean firms trade at a lower valuation than their global rivals. And President Lee Jae-myung has now launched an online survey in order to gauge public opinion on state affairs. Open from Tuesday, the Google Forms survey titled The People's Mailbox invites anyone to ask questions on the economy, society, politics, diplomacy, and national security. According to the presidential office, all submissions will be reported to the president, who plans to personally respond to those considered timely or widely relatable. The top office says it will continue expanding two-way communication channels to ensure the public stays at the center of policymaking. And today marks the 75th anniversary of the Korean War, and honoring history begins with remembering it. A recent exhibition showcased a project dedicated to photographing Korean War veterans and sharing their stories. Our defense correspondent Kim Bo-kyung was there.
An American war veteran with a Korean flag next to him. He is a veteran of the Korean War, one of 1,950,000 soldiers from 22 countries who fought for freedom on the Korean Peninsula. Some call it the forgotten war, but with the belief that the war and veterans' memories should not fade away, photographer Rami has been documenting Korean War veterans under an initiative named Project Soldier. Since it started in 2013, Rami has met more than 2,500 Korean War veterans, recording their stories.
지금까지 2,500여 명의 참전 용사분들이 인터뷰하셨는데 특히 인상 깊었던 인터뷰가 있었나요?
All the interviews were meaningful, but Colonel William Weber stood out. When veterans see their photos that make them feel like real heroes, they often tear up and ask about the price of the frame. I usually say, I'm just repaying a small debt. But Colonel Weber told me I was wrong, that as a professional soldier, he simply did his duty, and Koreans owe them nothing.
Photographer Rami's journey to document the veterans is not just to leave their stories behind. It is to let people know the value of freedom, and that freedom is not free. Sometimes military items were used in the photos to show that.
The helmet is more than just equipment. It has a symbolic meaning of protecting peace and freedom. Each veteran wrote their name, military unit, and service time on the helmet before taking the photo, showing the lasting symbol of the freedom they helped defend.
For freedom to truly endure, the sacrifices of veterans must be remembered, a message that resonates even with soldiers currently serving in Korea. Humboldt once said he was moved by how the photos captured the deep sincerity of senior veterans' commitment to freedom.
Even for me, who's currently still serving, it has inspired me to make sure I do as good as I can every day in support of the ROC, U.S. Alliance, and UNC right now. And then I'm really hopeful that our younger generation can come and see the why life is so great here in Korea.
The photographer now aims to go beyond documenting war veterans to share the stories of those who protect our freedom today.
이분들 다음에도 자유와 나라를 지켰던 수많은 사람들이 있었거든요. 주한미군 베테랑부터 경찰, 소방관. 앞으로는 이분들과 마찬가지로 자유를 지키는 수호자들, Guardians of Freedom, 이런 사람들의 얘기를 더 얘기할 예정입니다.
김보경, 아리랑 뉴스.
And those who lost loved ones during war now get a chance to remember the legacy of love that was lost too soon but never forgotten. Our An Sung-jin files the report of faith restoration for Korean War veterans.
Song Young-hwan. He was only 26 years old when he died on the battlefield during the Korean War. His daughter Song Jae-suk was only 3 years old. She would go to the National Cemetery to remember him, but for her whole life, she knew little about her father and was even unable to picture how he looked.
사실 3살 때 돌아가셨는데 아버지에 대한 추억이 있었겠어요? 그래서 저를 할머니가 키우셨거든요. 그래서 할머니가 늘 하는 얘기가 너 3살 때 어려서 이제 아버지가 늘 안고 다니면서 제습 빵구 하면서 안고 다니셨대요. 그게 문득 생각나더라고요. 그래서
But after more than 70 years, she was able to see his face. While searching for an uncle who was also a soldier and had gone missing during the war, she had submitted a DNA sample. Surprisingly, she heard back from the Defense Ministry's excavation and identification team that they had matched her sample and her father's remains had been discovered.
감사함도 느끼고. 근데 또 그날 어버이날 행사 가가지고 그분을 뵈니까 아, 이렇게 기적이 있구나. 정말 그 눈물도 나고 마음도 애리고 저도 정말 이렇게 모시게 된 걸 너무 감사드리고 내가 부모님들한테 보은이라고 그럴까? 이런 걸 할 수 있는 게 이런 거 아닌가.
Song was able to receive a restored version of her father's picture through the joint efforts of the National Remains Recovery Team and the National Forensic Service, making it the first completed case of face restoration from remains from the Korean War. Using a CT scanner and 3D modeling software, the National Forensic Service reconstructs the structure of the subject's face, layering on muscles, skin, and shaping the eyes, nose, and mouth.
I had the privilege of taking part in a project that brings forgotten war heroes back to life to honor them. It gave me a deep sense of responsibility. And to help restore the image of who he was in life, we added the combat helmet and uniform that he would have worn at the time of his death.
The goal was to recreate not just a likeness, but a presence. This year marks the 75th anniversary of the Korean War, and there are still so many, like Song Young-won, that remain missing or unidentified. For many families of war veterans, it's the pain of not knowing that never fades. And through efforts like these, the return of these soldiers can become more than a historical footnote. An Sung-jin, Arirang News.
Good morning, I'm Choi Ji-hee, and this is The World Now. A Russian missile strike on Ukraine's Dnipropetrovsk region has killed at least 26 civilians and injured hundreds in one of the most devastating attacks this week. On Tuesday around midday local time, a Russian ballistic missile attack hit the city of Dnipro and surrounding areas, including the town of Samar. The strike struck a passenger train, schools, kindergartens, a hospital, and other civilian infrastructure. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky, attending the NATO Summit in The Hague, condemned the attack as a message of terror and rejection of peace. He urged Western allies to impose tougher sanctions on Russia and supply additional military aid to Ukraine. Russian drones and missiles have struck multiple regions this week, leaving a high civilian toll across Ukraine. In Greece, a state of emergency remains in effect on the island of Chios, where wildfires have been burning for the past 3 days. Hundreds of firefighters have been deployed to contain the blazes before they reach villages and vital farmland. More than 400 firefighters, supported by 14 helicopters, 2 water-dropping planes, and more than 80 vehicles, are fighting multiple fire fronts as strong winds fan the blazes. Forests, olive groves, and some farmland, including areas known for producing Chios's famous mastillas resin, have been devastated. Authorities have evacuated hundreds of residents from more than 20 villages. Greece's Minister for Climate Crisis and Civil Protection confirmed that investigators are looking into the possibility of arson after simultaneous outbreaks in unconnected locations. Costa Rica's former security minister and Supreme Court justice, as well as being a high-ranking official under past administrations, Celso Gamboa Sanchez was arrested in San Jose on Monday on charges of international drug trafficking following a U.S. extradition request from Dallas, Texas. An associate, Edwin Lopez Vega, was also detained. Gamboa's arrest marks the first under Costa Rica's constitutional reform enacted in May, which permits the extradition of nationals for drug trafficking and terrorism, reversing a previous embargo. The public security minister praised the operation as the first of many blows against transnational crime and said Costa Rica will hold suspects accountable within or outside our borders. Eastern parts of the United States are experiencing intense heat dome effect, characterized by oppressive heat and high humidity across New York and its surrounding area. On Tuesday, New York City reached 38 degrees Celsius at JFK Airport for the first time since 2013, as extreme heat warnings covered the entire metropolitan area through 8 p.m. when it was downgraded to heat advisories through Wednesday evening. Experts predict that the heat dome will persist through midweek. Residents have been advised to stay hydrated and limit outdoor exposure during the late morning and afternoon hours.
Monsoon rains will fall in most parts of the country today, with showers across several regions. The rain will begin to clear from the southern regions first, and by tonight it will mostly let up. However, some parts of Gangwon-do and Chungcheon-pukto province could see rain until tomorrow morning. The central region could receive 5 to 30 millimeters of rainfall. The southern regions could see 5 to 10 millimeters of showers, along with strong winds. And with the rain, most areas will see below average temperatures today. Seoul will reach 25 degrees Celsius, which is about 3 degrees lower than yesterday. Daegu gets up to 28. Jeju, however, will be sunny and hot today with a high of 29 degrees Celsius. Looking ahead, rain will return nationwide on Saturday, starting with the capital area on Friday night. And those of us in the capital area should keep an umbrella handy through early next week.
Now that's all we have for this morning. Arirang News will be back at 5 p.m. Korea time. Thanks for watching.
저는 만 5살에 바이올린을 시작했는데요. 바이올린 소리를 워낙 좋아했어서 그 특유의 따뜻함과 약간 사람의 목소리 같은 목소리를 갖고 있거든요, 바이올린이. 저는 무대에 올랐을 때보다는 이제 혼자 연습할 때 더 큰 희열을 느끼는데 제가 표현하고자 하는 음악이 잘 나왔을 때 그때 가장 큰 기쁨을 느끼는 것 같아요. 그래서 저만의 색깔을 어떻게 하면 찾아갈 수 있을까 그걸 제일 많이 고민하는 것 같아요. 아무래도 연습을 할 때는 이제 생각과 고민을 많이 하는 반면에 무대에서 연주할 때는 정말 머릿속을 비우고 아무 생각도 안 하려고 하는 것 같아요. 무대에서는 자유롭게 콩쿨 무대도 저만의 독주라고 생각하는 자세를 가지려고 하고 있어요. 사실 바이올린과는 거의 제 인생의 대부분을 같이 해왔기 때문에 저를 힘들게 할 때도 많지만 제가 가장 사랑하고 아끼는 존재입니다. 작곡가가 전달하고 싶은 메시지와 또 제 자신이 관객들에게 전달하고 싶은 메시지를 모두 다 설득력 있게 잘 전달할 수 있는 그런 연주자가 되고 싶습니다.
We're here to bring a new type of news show.
New insights, new styles, and new topics every day.
We are News Generation.
Bringing news just for you. It's Wednesday, June 25th here in Seoul. I'm Lee Soo-jin, and this is News Generation. Joining us today is Lee Won-bin.
Good morning.
Good morning to you. And Grace is also with us.
Great to be here.
Have you. And both are here to speak on behalf of people in their 20s and 30s. It's Wednesday, which means we're going to begin with our keyword news, where we look at a story that is gaining traction. Today's keyword is ceasefire. U.S. President Donald Trump announced on Monday night that Israel and Iran have agreed to a complete and total ceasefire to end what Trump called a 12-day war. The announcement comes after the U.S. bombed 3 nuclear sites in Iran. It's still unclear, however, if the ceasefire will last, with Iran launching missiles at Israel before the ceasefire deadline. Grace, do you think President Trump made the right choice by striking those nuclear sites? Was it smart, or do you think it was just too risky? And do you think these ceasefires are sustainable?
Yeah, I remember seeing the news over the weekend and just being like, not again, because I don't want to feel any more anxiety about war and the implications of it. I think a lot of people are just tired of all the geopolitical conflict that we're constantly exposed to. And you know, while it may have been a necessary step from President Trump's point of view, many say that it was a hasty move. President Trump definitely took a gamble by inserting the United States into another conflict, but it may have paid off, at least for now, because it's been announced that Israel and Iran have agreed to a ceasefire, which could perhaps lead to lasting peace. We'll have to see how sustainable this is, considering that we're talking about a long-standing conflict with no simple resolution to the root of the issues.
Right, so this is definitely a developing story. So what are your thoughts on this one, Min?
For me personally, I think it was a smart, strategically efficient decision by President Trump. The relationship between Iran and Israel reached a volatile point and was about to tip over. And honestly, if not, it was probably tipping over. Now, Trump was able to seize the conflict in a very short amount of time with, quote, overwhelming strength and devastating force. Now, if it wasn't President Trump and the U.S. Army, including the Navy and the Air Force, the constant attacks between the two would have aggravated the conflict and things would have been much worse right now. However, when it comes to the sustainability of ceasefires like this, I'm not sure about how long it will last. Because each war that occurred in the modern days have very complex reasons, and multiple reasons are heavily intertwined. So it's not a simple universal question of yes or no. Now, therefore, it's quite difficult for me to say that these forceful ceasefires are the ultimate solution to the war, but it is definitely a huge progress, a much better option compared to just an ongoing war, in my opinion.
Right, so while there was progress made, it's clear that it remains fragile. So before heading to the NATO summit in the Netherlands, Trump was quite open about how he was critical of both sides, especially Israel, who he said unloaded on Iran as soon as they brokered the ceasefire. So we'll definitely be keeping an eye on this story. And that concludes our keyword news for this Wednesday. So as we make our way through the midweek stretch, we're looking back on an event that happened 75 years ago and altered the future of the peninsula. So let's take a look at the screen to learn more. On June 25, 1950, the Korean War began when North Korean troops crossed the 30th parallel and invaded South Korea, leading to a 3-year conflict that ended with an armistice but not a peace treaty. Today, the peninsula not only remains divided, but the two Koreas are still technically at war. On today's episode of NewsGen, we're reflecting on an event that tore families apart and to honor those who gave their lives in the conflict. As we just saw in the video, today marks the 75th anniversary of the Korean War, the focus of our main discussion. And this day serves as a reminder of the profound sacrifices and enduring legacy the conflict has left on the Korean peninsula, an impact that is still felt today. Wonbin, can you start us off by telling us about the history of the Korean War?
Absolutely, I can. And as someone who guarded the most important part of the border for 1.5 years, I would be more than honored to. Now, obviously, there are a number of important events and battles during the Korean War, but here are the must-know background history and the main 5 key points that people must know about the Korean War. So let's start with the background information. Korea was liberated from Japan in 1945 after being colonized for 35 years because Japan unconditionally surrendered when the US dropped 2 nuclear bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Now, after liberation, Korea was split into 2 regions according to the Moscow Conference, where the US decided to govern the South and the Soviet Union decided to govern the North. And just like that, Korea was broken into 2 pieces. Now, here are the 5 key points that you must know about Korean War. Number 1, on June 25th, 1950, North Korea launched a surprise attack at 3 a.m. No warning or no declaration of war whatsoever. Number 2, within 3 days, North Korea took over Seoul, the capital city of South Korea. Within 2 months, South Korea retreated all the way back to Busan, which is the southmost city of Korea. And at this point, the war basically seemed over. However, number 3, the miraculous Incheon landing operation. General MacArthur successfully launches a surprise attack landing in Incheon, allowing South Korea to retrieve all of its territory within just 2 weeks. And take a note that this operation was the turning point of the war as it cut off the enemy supply chain. Number 4, on October 10th, 1950, South Korea advances to the North Korean territory for the first time and advances up to Amrok River, which was basically the end point of North Korea. And another note that this date is marked as the Korean Armed Forces Day, or Gukgun의 날. Number 5, just when the war was about to be over, China joins the battle with a tremendous number of troops, completely overwhelming the South Korean army and the UN forces. They retreated back to the initial border, and after 3 years of war and battle, North and South Korea decided to agree on a ceasefire. Since then, and until today, Korea remains divided into 2 nations.
Right, I really appreciate you breaking it down for us so clearly. And hearing from someone who actually served on the border makes it feel so much more real, and it really shows why understanding this history remains really important. Yes. So Grace, although the Korean Peninsula has not experienced active warfare since the Korean War, has South Korea been involved in any international conflict since then?
Right. There hasn't been a civil war in the country since the Korean War, but Korean soldiers were dispatched to Vietnam in the 1960s to 70s for the Vietnam War, as well as for the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Also, Korean soldiers were sent to the Russia-Ukraine war and the Israel-Hamas war in more recent times. So you can say that our generation is both directly and indirectly involved in major global conflicts and wars.
So as you just said, our generation continues to experience the reality of the war both indirectly and directly, reminding us not to take peace for granted, as well as the urgent need to protect it, especially on days like this. So to hear a personal perspective on the conflict, we'll be speaking with the grandson of a Korean War veteran, and that conversation we'll take after the break, so please stay with us.
NewsGen wants to hear from you. Go to YouTube and search our channel Arirang News. Click Community and leave a comment down below. Make a new type of news with us.
Joining us today is Eugene Rhee, a grandson of a veteran who served in the Korean War. Hi, Eugene. And thank you so much for connecting with us today. So your grandfather was a Korean War veteran. Can you tell us what role he served during the war?
Okay, honestly, it's above my pay grade, as in we don't have any documents to show which unit he served in. But we do know that he was 15 when the Korean War broke out in 1950. But later he was kicked out of the military in 1951 when they found out his real age. But then he re-enlisted in 1952, and then he continued to serve until 1956, where he was honorably discharged as a first lieutenant.
Now, thank you for telling us the story of your grandfather, and honestly, I really got the goosebumps when you told us that he re-enlisted after getting kicked out from the army in 1952. Now, with all that story, you must feel a deep sense of pride and respect for your grandfather. Now, what does his legacy mean to you personally? And we also heard that you're involved in some related activities like a camp. Could you tell us more about that as well?
Ever since a young age, I took an extra interest in the Korean War because I was told that my grandfather served. So up until high school, I made a club studying international conflict. And right now, I'm especially interested in inter-Korean relations and Indo-Pacific security affairs just because I was constantly told that he was a veteran. So I had this extra curiosity into conflict and war. And regarding your second question, I attended a UN Sending States Descendants camp where descendants of the Korean War veterans would gather up and learn about the Korean War and peacemaking. First, we visited the Korean War Memorial in Seoul to pay respects to those who served for Korea during the Korean War. And then we visited Pyeongtaek Camp Humphreys, where we learned about some institutions that uphold peace in the Korean Peninsula, like the UN Command or US Forces Korea or Combined Forces Center. And then we went to Paju, where we went near the DMZ to go to Dorasan Observatory, where we could literally see North Korea with our bare eyes. We didn't even need binoculars. And then we also visited the third infiltration tunnel, where North Koreans tried to infiltrate into North Korea by digging a tunnel. And lastly, we went to Busan to go to the UN cemetery to honor all of those from the UN who sent their troops and those who died while serving for Korea. And then we did a semi-forum about how to raise awareness about the Korean War and also to support veterans who served in the Korean War.
Related to that, Eugene, what do you think is the best way then for younger generations to honor this day?
I believe that especially younger generations, since we do not have direct experience of war, we personally did not fight in any wars, we should remember the cost of human lives, especially reflect on the sacrifices that people made, but not just looking back. I believe that we should really learn from the past and think critically about peace, resilience, and values, especially in today's world where international relations are really getting chaotic.
Right, so thank you so much for sharing your personal story. And I think what you said about how the past is still very relevant in our present today really stood out to me as well. So thank you so much for connecting with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
So we just heard from a grandson of a Korean War veteran who reminded us of the legacy and the impact that the Korean War has left on today's generation. Now we turn our attention to what today's younger generations can take away from this part of history. So what should younger generations like millennials and Gen Zs take away from the history of the Korean War?
I think the last part of what Eugene said really does resonate with me as well. The most important part is that freedom comes at a cost. It may seem free, but it's definitely not free. If not, it's the most expensive thing. And it was built with blood, sweat, and tears by many veterans whose names aren't even remembered. Now, it was recorded that there was approximately 1.6 million casualties during the Korean War, which is absolutely devastating to think about. And personally, what upsets me more is that most of these casualties were young soldiers, young men, and even students just like me. And it's such a tragedy that this was caused because of a handful of people from North Korea, filled with greed and driven with self-interest. Now, remembering history and the past is definitely important, but it is also equally important to know the present and the future as well. Although there aren't any active war combats in Korea, more than 500,000 active soldiers are protecting the country and the border. And most of them are, again, young men and women in their 20s, which is considered to be the golden era of our life. And like I said, as someone who served his military service in the JSA, 판문점 in Korean, I can confidently say that tens of thousands of soldiers are guarding the border to keep everyone safe, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And that is because Korea is a divided nation. And again, I think it is really important to understand that freedom comes at a cost.
Right, so you did a good job explaining but for some of our viewers who may not be as familiar, so JSA stands for Joint Security Area, and it's the most well-known section of the DMZ between North and South Korea, and it's the only place where soldiers on both sides can stand face to face, and that's why I think it's especially impressive that you actually served there.
Thank you.
And there's also a well-known film about JSA.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, there's Park Chan-wook and some other famous actors.
There's Lee Byung-won,
yeah.
Yes.
So and all this really brings attention to the human stories and tensions that still exist in that unique space. So, Grace, do you have anything to add to this?
Yeah, so Korea has transformed itself from one of the world's poorest countries in 1950, with 80% of its territory in conflict due to the Korean War, into now a top 10 global economy. It has also successfully transitioned from being a major recipient of international aid to becoming a significant aid donor, which is a unique achievement on the global stage. And of course, behind these remarkable achievements are the sacrifice of our parents and grandparents' generations who, gave up their daily luxuries, their comfort, and even their lives to allow our generation to enjoy the lives that we have today. Actually, my grandfather was also a Korean War veteran, and he is now buried at the Memorial Cemetery in Icheon. So I am again reminded on this day and very grateful for him and all the other brave soldiers and veterans. We also can't forget about the countries that provided aid to us in those difficult times. In fact, 16 UN member nations participated in the Korean War, and 67 other countries provided humanitarian aid in the form of supplies, medical aid, and human resources. It's great that now we have this opportunity to remember their efforts, and we can also now help other nations in need, especially now that Korea is in a position where it can contribute to the greater good of humanity and peace.
So like you said, this progress isn't something that's just handed to us. It was built on the sacrifice of many people, including your grandfather. And I really appreciate you highlighting how there was international support and how now it's important for us to also pay that forward. So one thing, June is Korea's Military Appreciation Month, the month of patriots and veterans. So why is this month especially meaningful?
Yes, like you just said, June is the Remembrance Month in honor of the noble sacrifices made by those who gave their lives for the nation. The reason why it's also very meaningful is that it is the month that the Korean War occurred. And just one more thing is that Korea's Memorial Day is in June as well, which is on June 6th. In Korean, we call it 현충일.
That's also very important to remember. So what types of activities typically take time during this month?
Yeah, June is a month of appreciation, remembrance, and public recognition of patriots and veterans in Korea. Aside from Memorial Day on June 6th, like Wonbin mentioned, and Korean War Day, which is today, June 25th, the Ministry of Patriots and Veterans Affairs organizes events like the Korea Memorial Festa with music, food, and cultural experiences to raise public awareness of soldiers, veterans, and their contribution to national security. Additionally, the War Memorial of Korea hosts ceremonies and performances by military bands and honor guards to commemorate the sacrifice of fallen heroes and their families.
So throughout this month, there are many different meaningful events and ceremonies that you mentioned that help us remember and honor those who served. But sometimes it's the personal words of gratitude that resonate the most. And that's why on the Arirang News YouTube channel, we asked our viewers what they would like to say to those from previous generations who fought for their country and helped shape it to what it is today. And here are the answers we got. Victor Tao's 9613 says, every day we live in peace and prosperity because veterans gave up their peace and chance at prosperity. So from the most inner parts of my being, I want to say 감사합니다. And at Benny D97 says, to the heroes, thank you for protecting our country for so many years. And at White Knight 113 says, I owe my freedom, my voice, and my dreams to your courage and sacrifice. Thank you. Your legacy lives on in every step we take forward. So now to wrap up our discussion today, war is a part of history that we all hope won't be repeated. Wonbin, this might not be an easy question to answer, but in your view, what can younger generations do to help prevent history from repeating itself?
I think, excuse me, I think I've emphasized this enough. And as the comment that we just read said, we must understand that Korea is still at war. Now, although the society is at peace and the economy is, it's not that good nowadays, but it's relatively doing well. At least, like Grace said, it developed into a stable economy compared to 50 years ago. A war definitely can break out again anytime. And we must know how unpredictable and taunting North Korea is. Now, yes, building a career and a successful personal life is important, and I'm not saying that to give that up. But remembering and not forgetting the circumstances that we are in is the most important part to prevent history from repeating. Therefore, I would like to finish by borrowing the words of 신채호, who was an independence activist. 역사를 잊은 민족에게 미래는 없다, which means a nation that forgets its history has no future.
Right, I'm really glad you mentioned Chios. He's actually one of my also favorite historical figures because of how much he emphasized how history should be written from the perspective of the Korean people rather than through the lens of foreign powers. And also, there's also many different important figures such as General Park Baek-sun, which you also mentioned with General MacArthur earlier on. And I think remembering all of their stories is really important, especially on this day. So do you have anything to add to this, Grace?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I don't know a single person around me that actually wants war. Not only is it devastating for the nations involved, but for innocent civilians and soldiers, along with their families who are directly impacted, as well as people all over the world who are indirectly impacted as well. Younger generations can help prevent intensifying geopolitical conflict by, first of all, educating ourselves, participating in peace-building initiatives, supporting humanitarian efforts, and holding leaders accountable for peace. And what makes our generation unique is that now we're able to leverage the power of social media and technology for positive change, and we can also promote dialogue and understanding across borders.
So as we reflect on the legacy of the Korean War, it's clear that the past provides us lessons for the future. It is up to today's younger generations to remember the sacrifices that were made and to work towards building a safer and more united future. And this brings us to the end of today's episode of News Generation. But News Gen will be back tomorrow at 10:30 a.m. Korea time. Big thanks to Wonbin.
Always a pleasure.
Good to have you. And Grace.
Thank you
for joining us today. And to all our viewers, thank you for watching. And we hope you have the best day. We are
News Generation.
How to survive in Korea. Barbecue restaurants. Step 1. Taking care of your clothes. Put your jacket in the plastic bag. Seal it tight. If the stool flips open, store your clothes inside. Wearing light colours? Grab an apron. It's the best defence against oil splatter and smoke. Step 2. Bottomless side dishes. Basic side dishes at a barbecue restaurant. Eat, eat and eat as much as you want. Side dishes come with free refills.